So, you might have heard Russia on the news recently. Maybe they were talking about Russian assets influencing the United States elections. Maybe you heard about Russia invading Ukraine or being in the constant war in the Donbass. And maybe you heard something about Crimea, but I doubt it. Have you heard about the Union State? In my opinion, it's the most important thing. And if you haven't, let's get into it.
Бывший руководитель белорусского правительства и парламента теперь будет помогать в развитии всего Евразийского союза. Следующая встреча лидеров в Минске в мае. Можно ли показать большой палец? И по поводу двусторонних российско-белорусских отношений в последние месяцы одна из самых обсуждаемых политических тем. Лукашенко приехал к Путину на очередной раунд переговоров. Последний раз в Сочи они общались почти 6 часов подряд. Ну а накануне, во время своей большой пресс-конференции, президент России максимально подробно рассказал, в чем сложности и детали этих переговоров. Самая сложная сфера — энергетика. Беларусь хочет равных цен с российскими производителями.
Вопрос очень странный. То есть Россия должна датировать другую страну так же, как самую датируемую в России область Смоленскую. Это странновато. Это можно или нет? Можно. Но что для этого нужно? Для этого нужны общие правила в виде законов.
То есть еще большая интеграция, тем более, что Путин озвучил цифру: 90% того, о чем договорились еще при создании союзного государства 20 лет назад, по многим вопросам так и не сделано.
Мы добиваемся уже согласования по некоторым пунктам, по каким-то еще не достигнутым договорам.
So, it's all about Belarus and Russia's relationship. And it starts with the people involved. So, the leader of Belarus is Lukashenko. Condoleezza Rice, about 10 years ago, described him as the last remaining dictator in the heart of Europe. It's not exactly a praising endorsement of him. We had sanctions on him for a while because he had a brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters back in around 2006. Those have been lifted mostly now, but let's just say he's not a great guy. But, you know, we should feel for the people of Belarus, and the situation right now there is not great. They have skyrocketing oil prices. Why? Because Russia's trying to use it as leverage. They depend heavily on subsidized oil from Russia, and Putin's trying to get a deal out of them that Lukashenko, the dictator, doesn't want to really agree to. We'll get to that in a second, but Lukashenko has tried to get some leverage against Russia recently. He invited Mike Pompeo to Belarus, which is actually the first time since 1993 that a Secretary of State of the U.S. has even been to Belarus, period. But he didn't get much out of it, besides that symbolism of the West caring a little bit about Belarus. And it definitely didn't help with the oil crisis going on there. And everybody knows that economy is the most important thing to maintaining a country, especially if you're a dictator. So I guess the question is, why is Russia doing this? And it's to create this union state. And you might be like, what am I talking about? Well, it's actually not a new idea. The idea stems from a treaty that they signed back in 1998. At that time, Putin hadn't been president yet. It was still Yeltsin, but Lukashenko actually has been the dictator of Belarus since that time. And the intention there was loosely to create a federation in the future, sort of like the Soviet Union, the common head of state, legislature, flags even, army, citizenship, currency, essentially a brand new country for the both of them. And while it never really materialized into something concrete, it has been gaining traction and steam since 2014 because of the creation of the Eurasian Economic Union, which is another one of Putin's ploys, or if you want to look at it more optimistically, a multilateral program that he's put Russia into. And we'll cover that in another video. But this idea has been around, but you probably haven't heard of it because I don't think they've ever talked about it on CNN. And I hadn't really heard of it until somewhat recently. Um, so, all right, you might be saying this is just another plan by Putin, another expansionist move to try to control another country in Eastern Europe, just like he did in Crimea. Well, it has higher stakes than that involved. It's actually personal for Putin. Not in that Belarus pissed him off or anything, but it's important for Putin to maintain his own power as president of Russia. His term actually ends in 2024, and he can't legally run again without waiting like he did in 2012. And that turned out to be a pretty big disaster for Putin because that was when good old Hillary Clinton killed Gaddafi in Libya. And that was a big embarrassment for Russia because Gaddafi had been a longtime partner, and they actually, under Mendeleev, backed out of vetoing the resolution in the UN that led to that toppling. So Putin really wants to avoid ever having to give up his power again because he doesn't really believe in anyone but himself. And I guess from his perspective, he's justified in saying that. But yeah, I mean, he still cares somewhat about the legal process because if he just said, screw it, I'm going to stay president, that would have too many negative repercussions with the Russian people. The protests would be a little bit too intense. The military might not like it. The oligarchs might not like it. So he does have to play by the rules. So the question here is, how does this Union state allow him to circumvent that deadline in 2024? Well, as I read to you guys by the 1998 treaty, it'll create a whole new constitution. And that means he can revise the constitution however he likes. He can give himself unlimited terms. He can give himself a third term just. He can basically finagle it however the hell he wants. And so, while it might be nice for him to be, getting his expansionist thrills with Belarus, the bigger deal here is about maintaining his own power. Belarus is very mixed on this. Lukashenko, when he signed this in the 1990s, loved it because Russia was run by Yeltsin, who was at that point really old and was always kind of crazy and not very capable. So he actually thought he could get a lot of leverage out of Russia if they decided to go on with this treaty. Obviously now, Belarus is small potatoes compared to Russia, so he really doesn't want to just become a province, essentially absorbed into the Russian sphere. And the people themselves are mixed about it. A poll before this oil crisis happened and this sort of deal came up again, polls were showing people in Belarus sort of liked it. It was around 60%. Now it's tanked to around 40%, but it's sort of a volatile time, so I don't know what you can really say. It seems that people are about 50-50 on it. But support for the EU, like joining the EU, has risen pretty substantially. It's about around 30% now, which is the highest it's ever been. Biggest takeaway here is how desperate is Putin to do this? Because his job is on the line. So I'd happen to bet that he's pretty desperate to do this, and he's going to keep pushing Belarus, and he's going to push that economy to the brink of collapse. And their economy's not that strong in the first place. And really, there's nothing the U.S. can do. They can't give them the discounted rates that Russia was giving them. It's just not possible. And honestly, no one in Europe really cares enough to do that. So it's also a big deal, not just because of we're going to see more of Putin potentially, and he won't leave in 2024 if he manages to pull this off. We'll see probably the first attempt to create a supranational state in the 21st century. He would actually be almost leapfrogging the EU federalists by doing this because he could create his own sort of new federal union, stylized a Eurasian union. And there's other countries like Kazakhstan who would be willing to probably become more politically integrated. So he could actually even leapfrog the EU in this new 21st century idea of a supranationalist union. This will be something we'll keep following, and thanks for checking in.